Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. Yes, I know, 208 came and left. I was tinkering, as I always am. This seems so dark today, but I couldn't seem to make it brighter. I decided to give up. And so we're getting what we're getting, but really it's not about how I look, it's really about the information that's being presented on this channel week after week to help you with the success of your reef tank. So I want you to enjoy this one. There's going to be some visuals, so hopefully you are actually watching this one and not listening to it while driving. But in the end, the information is definitely something you can glean from a conversation. I just have some props behind me that I thought would be fun to share today. So last week we talked about setting up a reef tank, and I was suggesting what kind of aquarium to buy. And I said I wasn't going to talk about sumps yet. So today we're going to talk about the sump. And so that is where we're heading. But before I say that, I just want to remind you that in 2 weeks, Aquashella is taking place in Daytona, Florida. I will be there, and I'm speaking one of those days. I think it's Saturday. So I encourage you to go, and I don't see us having a live stream that weekend because I'll be busy. So we have one more stream next week. And the preview for next week, I'm going to do a topic on YouTube I've never done before specifically, and that is the breakdown of the 280-gallon reef that sprung a leak on July 3rd, 2010. So we're going to go through that story, that entire event, and share it on YouTube because it's never been shared. It's been one of those things that I did a huge documentation about on reefaddicts.com. If you want to cheat and go read it in advance, you can go find it. But if you want to wait for next week, that will be the conversation. And I'm going to grab all the images from my articles, and I'm going to build a nice presentation. So I hope you guys enjoy that and learn from it, because unfortunately many of us deal with a tank that suddenly leaks, and when that happens we have to scramble. And so if my video as well as that article can help you prepare for the scramble, then my work here is done, and that is always my goal. I'm believing that the audio is good, so I'm seeing it move and no one has said I can't hear you. I'm wearing another cool shirt. We have something like 7 more to go. So you can look forward to that. This one is Plumeria. I got this while I was in Hawaii when I visited Oahu years ago, and I loved it, and it's nice and loud, and hopefully my microphone can keep up with it today. Okay, so I talked about the 2 things I wanted to mention for next week and the week thereafter, so let's get into the sumps. First of all, I'll show you what's behind me. So here is, oops, almost hit the wrong button. Here is the sump behind me. So this is a very simple sump. I can't zoom in or anything because, you know, this is live, but I will be standing next to it. But I just wanted to give you a heads up, a quick view of what it looks like. A sump is a container that holds all your gear under the aquarium. And when it comes to the gear, it really comes down to what you need versus what you want. And a lot of people want everything, or they've heard of everything and they feel like they need it all to be successful. And yet there are certain pieces of gear that I've never used that are very popular these days. For me, it's all about filtration in the sump and get the water back up to the tank. So I've always urged people to have a sump underneath. It's actually my preferred way of running any kind of aquarium. But I will add the fact that I run a 27-gallon that has no sump. But I would have preferred that if it was my tank. But since it's Caitlin's, we're doing it the way she would have done it. She would never have had a sump. She would not have dealt with a protein skimmer. She would have just been happy to take a sponge and clean the walls of the glass. And so I am just doing that in her honor. And that's why that tank is set up the way it is. I wanted to set it up in the manner I think she would run it herself. Now, my reef, of course, has a huge sump underneath it. And I did a video about it years ago on this channel. I did a video about the first one, even, you know, previous to that, which is also up on the channel. But what's behind me today is a very simple sump, and basically water drains down into it. There's a protein skimmer. It goes through some baffles into a return zone. It's that simple. 2 sections. And with that kind of setup, you are more inclined to have room to do things. When you take a smaller sump and you put in a lot of different little zones and compartments, and you add filter socks, and you add a fleece roller, and you add a refugium, and you put in a top-off container, because why not? Everything shrinks, and the tighter it gets, the harder it is to work in there. her bark by herself. There's probably people out in the street. It could be the mailman. It could be someone trying to change my religion. I don't know. But the bottom line is we're just going to have to deal with the barking in the background. The sump that I want to talk about today is going to be the simple one, but I also want to mention that the bigger you can fit it inside the aquarium stand, the better. The more space you have, the happier you'll be, the more likely you'll do maintenance on this aquarium, and especially in the sump area, versus something that's really, like I said earlier, was so compact with so many tiny zones. There's no room to get your hands in there. There's no room to get a scraper in there. You have to remove 3 things to get 1 thing out. And those type of sumps might seem really cool to a gearhead, but they're really impractical to work on, and they tend to lead to LARS, which is just lazy ass reef syndrome. And we don't want to be that person. We want to work, and we want to get our things taken care of in a methodical and regular manner rather than putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. Case in point, I have an algae turf scrubber I can't get to. And so I put it off way too long on a regular basis. And so my algae harvests are always terrible because I just can't get to it. As soon as I get up the anemone cube, that resolves itself and I can start working on it. And I can start cleaning it every 7 to 10 days or whatever. And that'll be fantastic. And my life will be exponentially easier. But for now, it's behind something. I have to move that something out of my way. It actually takes me about 1.5 minutes to work it away from the tank to get enough space to pull the drawer out. It's a real hassle. So if you have a sump that has a lot of things in the way, or you have wires in the way, or you have a light fixture in the way, and you're not getting to what's in there, such as the skimmers collection cup or the filter socks are in the back, you'll probably neglect them, and that can be to the detriment of the aquarium. So we want to set up a nice big sump. So if your aquarium stand has no room underneath, let's say it has drawers and shelves because it's more like a bookcase, that's already a bad stand, but it works. I mean, maybe that's all you could use. But then we have to consider, well, where on earth can you put the sump? Can you put it adjacent to the tank? Can you put it behind the tank, like in a closet, perhaps? Or can you go through the wall to the room behind and have a little sump area there where you can easily walk up, work on it, keep an eye on it, even it'll be nice to see it, and then turn around and come back to the front where the magic is. Because in the end, the reef tank is what you want to look beautiful. You don't want to look at a bunch of gear. You want to see the livestock, you want to enjoy the fish, you want to see the corals and see how they're growing. You just want you want no distractions. You want it to be beautiful without any kind of gear in there. And in fact, invisible power heads are my ultimate goal. I don't think we'll ever get it, but I would love that. Because having flow in the tank without having to look at any kind of power head would be my dream. I would love that. And, when you're in the ocean, you don't see the power heads. I know that's silly. But really, I mean, the flow comes from all over the place, and it just works. And in our boxes of water, we have to artificially create that flow, and we use different options, different power heads, different gyres and vortex and Tunzi pumps. I mean, there's a lot of different pumps on the market that you can put in there. The Sea Chase Streams, I just watched a video about that yesterday, about how to take one apart and clean it. And that's the other thing, side note, whatever power heads in your tank, they work great when they're clean, and when you neglect them and let them build up with all kinds of growth, the flow is less, and you're actually, it can become detrimental to the corals. Those corals need a certain amount of flow to keep the detritus off of them, to be rinsed clean, to even blow off the mucus membrane off of them, with such as like leather corals, for example. The Gorgonian that I have in Caitlin's Reef, it didn't do well until I put enough flow in there to keep blowing off the mucus that comes off of its skin. And that works out. And as the pump gets dirtier and dirtier, less and less flow, of course, now the coral may start to almost smother underneath its own mucus. So we want to make sure that we are keeping those pumps clean, and you got to take them out and you got to scrub them clean. And to do so once a month might seem like overkill, but doing it every 3 months for sure. And if you've waited 6 months or 9 months, you're waiting too long. It's time to get your arms wet, grab those power heads, and if you have an extra one, swap it out, put the clean one in, and go scrub or soak the dirty one that you let build up for so long. Another nice thing you'll notice is when you do put the clean power head in your tank already looks cleaner because it was kind of an eyesore. It's covered in algae, it's covered in Valonia, it's got furry stuff growing on it. There's patches of coralline, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But when you can get it down to the base plastic color, a lot of times it kind of blends in better with your background and it's less visible. So keeping things clean Does two things. It looks better and it keeps the flow in the aquarium. But let's get back down into the sump. So let's switch cameras here for a second because I want to show you some stuff. Now, this sump here, like I said, is a two-section sump. It has a single drain that goes in right here. This is a 1-inch bulkhead that goes into 1-inch pipe that goes into what I call the bubble tower. I've been building acrylic sumps now for, I'd say 15 years. Really almost 20, and I make custom ones, so you don't see sumps all the time on my website ready to purchase. I have examples on there, but I'm building it custom for the customer that needs a certain thing. This one here is, actually I don't know the dimensions. I know that it's 16 wide and 16 tall, but the length, this might be, I don't know, let's say 30 inches maybe, and we have a large section here for a protein skimmer. We have the triple baffles, and we have the return zone. Now, I like the bubble tower system because all the air and water that goes down into the sump will boil away inside this box, and what comes out the base is just pure water, so you don't have microbubble problems. And other sump builders will usually put a filter sock there because if you pump or if you drain water into a sock, it catches all the bubbles and only water comes out, and so you've alleviated it. But you have to always clean the filter socks. It never ends. It seems to be forever. Your job is every 3 days, pull out a sock, put a new one in, and if you don't, you're going to regret it. I'm going to open this door again because I feel like there's an echo. This sounds better. And hopefully I'm loud enough. I know the microphone's way over there. Now, the pipe is going down to this point in the sump. It's not going all the way down, which a lot of people do. They'll take a pipe and they put it all the way into the sump down low, thinking that's the best way to do it, when really you should only penetrate the water about 1 inch. Half an inch, 1 inch, just under the surface is just enough to get the water to go down inside the sump area, and the air can breathe out of the pipes more rapidly and kind of boil around the top inside this bubble tower. If you had a pipe going all the way down, what happens is that the air will try to burp its way out of the pipe, but it's having to really struggle against all that water. And so it belches and the water level changes in the sump. It changes in the overflow box a lot. And you get that weird surging sound. And you're just like, why does it keep doing that? And it's because the pipe was too long going into the sump. So in this sump, the height of the baffle dictates how high the water line will be right here. So this is a 9-inch height baffle. And so the water line will be 9 inches. And I have the pipe going 1 inch under that 9-inch level. So if this is my water line, my pipe is right here. And the water will then just quietly come out of the pipe. It will be inside here. And another thing I like to do inside the bubble tower is take live rock rubble and fill this tower with rubble so that the water and the air are hitting the bubbles, or I'm sorry, the water and the air are hitting the rocks and trying to get around all that rock to come out these grooves all around the base. And it really, like I said, it reduces the air bubbles significantly, almost to the point you have none. Then you have a protein skimmer sitting right here. And let's say you had a skimmer, let's just take, for example, I think the Octo series doesn't like to be in a lot of water. So if I were to put an Octo skimmer in a 9-inch deep section of a sump, odds are the skimmer will want to keep overflowing because they're designed to be in shallower water. So what you can do when you're in a situation where the section is too deep for the protein skimmer, you can take something like this handy dandy frag rack, and we're going to put in there as if it was a skimmer stand. And then we put the skimmer on top of it, and now it's only sitting in about 3 or 4 inches of water, and the skimmer will behave completely. Now, the only thing you have to keep in mind when you do a skimmer stand to lift the skimmer up is now that your skimmer is on top of it, is it going to hit the base of the cabinet? Is it going to be too tall, or do you still have some clearance? Because a protein skimmer has a collection cup you have to remove that's right about here. And if the lid is right up against the wood, it's going to be putting skimmate and spatter on the wood underneath the cabinet, and it's going to grow mold. It's going to be disgusting. So what you can do in this area here is you can actually cover this area of the wood. You can either paint it, or you could get, it's basically a clear type of material like you'd put for a drawer liner in the kitchen drawers, and you can stick that in here to create a water barrier. So that way the spatter gets on that plastic film and doesn't get on the wood itself. And that way you can have your protein skimmer right here. You don't have to worry about spatter. And you keep in the middle of the sump. I don't like skimmers that are near the front or near the back, because if they do try to overflow, they can overflow on the rim of the sump and even go over the edge and get the floor all wet. So if you can get that collection cup in the middle, the epicenter of your sump, That way it spatters over and just runs down the body. All the water stays in your sump and stays out of the cabinetry. The next section is the triple baffles, and you may not have noticed this specifically, but my first baffle is the one that goes to the bottom of the sump. The second baffle has the gap underneath, and then the third baffle is to the bottom of the sump. This is the over, under, over method, and it's what I've always recommended for sumps, where so many sump builders like to do under, over, under, which is kind of a weird backwards way of doing it. And what happens with this system here, you don't get that weird protein slime on the perimeter of your sump because it's flowing through. Where when you have that baffle coming up too high, the water stops here and you get this weird growth. And then on this section over here, it's really hard to dictate how high the water level should be because of that under-over situation. So I've always suggested that you go over the first baffle, under the second baffle, and over the third baffle into the return zone. This one here sets that height, like I said, at 9 inches. And then this one here, we would have it drop about 1 inch into the return zone, which would be about 8 inches high. And that means that your power head that's sitting in this section here, your return pump, would be under the water, under 8 inches of water. So it's not going to run dry, and it's going to have plenty of water to suck in and push up to the aquarium and keep your pump from drying out or from burning up from running out of water. Sometimes sump builders will make the return zone really, really small because they try to put so many extra areas in there. I'd much rather have a nice big return zone that could totally handle taking care of the tank for 24 hours without top off. Now, if you have top off, you don't have to worry about that so much, but still having a nice big return zone has its benefits. Like, for example, let's say I had a big protein skimmer here, and it's just something I had, and I wanted to put in a Two Little Fishies reactor. I would then put it in my return zone with my return pump. And that way I can have something to run carbon in, or I could be running biopellets, or I could be running some other kind of media. And having a reactor inside the sump is always good because if the reactor were to leak or drip, it's in the system. Where if you have it hanging on the outside of the sump, let's take this right here, it's hanging on the outside on a hook, and then it decides to spatter over, or it starts dripping onto the woodwork, and eventually the inside of your stand is getting wetter and wetter, and the liquid goes under the sump, and then you start thinking, my sump is leaking, and it's really hard to determine if a sump is leaking or not once there's a film of water underneath, because it just seems to never stop, and you keep thinking, it's got to be dry by now, so if I still see water, this thing is leaking, and it's not. It's just that water takes forever to evaporate away. So if you can put your reactor inside, that would be best. Now here's an example of that same return. This is the C-Chain return pump that I was just using as an example. This is the Synchro Silent. And this one here has rubber suction cups to put on the bottom. Now I wouldn't use these suction cups as a holder to like make it stay, but as a sound dampener, so that way if there's any vibration, it vibrates on the rubber and doesn't send the sound of the pump into the sump and resonate and create a hum. So if you have some suction cups that came with your return pump, you can use them. If you don't have suction cups, or if your pump didn't come with that, you can get that rubber, they're like a pad that are used to grab hot pots in the kitchen. They're made of rubber, and they're food grade, they're safe, and you can just cut the shape you need and put it right under your pump and set the pump on it and protect it. Now when I first put this in here for you guys, I stuck it in here, and of course it stuck to the bottom of the sump. And then when I wanted to move this over, it pulled the rubber right off the feet. So there we go. Here's our pump with no suction cups, and there's our 4 suction cups in there. So that's something to just keep in mind, that if you had to relocate it, you may have a situation where you've got to peel them back off the bottom. And then as they get older and older, they're going to get harder and harder, and you might need new suction cups at one point, or like I said, use something else that is a nice sound dampener. Now, another trick that I've done in the past with the return pump that was internal, meaning inside the sump, is I set it down about near the base, but I didn't actually have it touch the base, and I ran my plumbing up to the tank, and that had this thing floating. So it had 0 contact with the sump, and there was no sound. Now, I'm not saying the C-Chains are vibrating noisemakers. I'm just telling you in general, if you have a pump of any kind that's making sound, these are some solutions. But if you were to have one, like for example, I used a lot of mag pumps, and they made a lot of noise. And so I was always trying to figure out ways to make them quieter. This one here, they're dead silent. I mean, they're called silent for a reason. But I don't want you to get the wrong idea and think, well, Mark says this pump is really, really loud and I have to do all these things. That's not the case. This pump comes with fittings to where you can shove tubing on, but I really prefer to screw in my plumbing So if I were to get some kind of PVC plumbing I was going to run up to the tank, I would thread it directly into the pump and not use this connection, because these types of connectors, the inside diameter gets smaller and smaller to accommodate putting tubing on there. And I prefer to have more flow coming up. So I actually like to go larger. Like if this one here, for example, this might be 1/2 inch threaded. I might do some kind of a what's called a reducer and go 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and then do 1 inch pipe going up, and then reduce at the bulkhead and go into the tank. And that way I'm getting a lot of flow until I absolutely have to reduce it down to the next size to go in the display tank itself. Now, another choice of return pump that you may be considering, or that you didn't know you had an option for, you can run a pump externally to the sump. It would just sit here on the outside, and you would have a bulkhead going through the side of the sump to that external pump, and then it pushes up into the tank. The benefits of external pumps in the past was usually you got more flow and you had less heat, and so it was a really big choice for the larger aquariums. But for smaller tanks and simple setups where you don't have a lot of space, an internal return pump's always the easiest choice. Plus, an external pump could potentially leak one day, where an internal one, if it's leaking underwater, you'd never even know it. Okay. Heaters. Here's an example of a heater that's way too big for this tank. This is a 300 watt heater. I just happen to have it. I'm just happening to set up a tank. I'm going to use the gear I own. No. We never use whatever heater we have. We get the correct heater for the tank. If we had a 100-gallon tank over the sump, then we could use a 300 watt heater, but really we would want to use 250 watt heaters. And the reason we're doing that is because if one heater were to stick on, if for some reason it decided not to turn off, it does not have the wattage to cook your reef. If you had a single 300 watt heater that stayed in the on position and nothing shut it off, no matter what you'd set up in advance, it will have the ability to warm up the tank more and more and more until things start dying. So instead, we want to take whatever the tank size needs, divide it by 2, and put 2 heaters in. So in this case, this heater is actually too long for this sump, and I would have to put it in here in the skimmer section across the front. But now I've got water going in here and flowing this way, and it's really kind of like a warm pocket. And yes, there is some, what do you call it? The heat transfer is going to the body of water, but it's kind of hugging the corner here. It's not really a great spot. I really prefer to have heaters within the baffle, if at all possible, if you have the room. And so when I make sumps, I like to make it wide enough that the heaters will fit in between. If that way, when water flows, it flows right over the heater into the next section. It is literally heating all the water going through at all times. And that is your best bet. Now, one thing people also like to think is, will this melt my sump? My sump is made of acrylic. I'm really worried. I better put suction cups on it or something like that. As long as this stays submerged in water, it's not going to melt your sump. It's when you're doing those water changes or you're pumping out all the water out for a water change and you want to really clean the sump and you left the heater plugged in, it will melt a puddle directly into your acrylic, and that's it. If it was a glass tank, the heater being on while you're cleaning could actually crack the tank. So heaters, if they're in the baffles, where that section's always full of water all the time, when I want to take everything out, and I remove this, and I remove this, and I remove my reactor, and I take a shop vac, and I suck out all the water, this section here is holding water because that over baffle system, this has its whatever's in there, 3/4 of a gallon, whatever that water is, my heater stays wet at all times. I don't have to worry about it burning up. Now I use an aquarium controller, which is just a computer that tells it when to turn things on and off. And so I can say water change time and hit a button, and it will turn off the power to my heater, to my return pump, to my skimmer. It turns off everything. And then 45 minutes later, everything comes back to life. But if you are just trying to keep things really simple and you don't want to use a controller, you might choose to use something as simple as a 6-way power strip. And a power strip like this would be really good to have near a sump, but we don't want to have it on the bottom of the sump behind it with all the plugs right here, because if any water were to slosh over, it would go straight into these outlets and short out the power strip, possibly trip the breaker, and kill the aquarium. So if you have a power strip, we want to put it near the sump, preferably above it. You could put it on the end here and have all your cords go to here, and it's mounted inside the cabinet. You can have it back here in the back if that's a better place for it to be. I wouldn't put it directly above, because if for some reason you were to nudge it and it fell off the screws, it could drop right into the tank, into the sump full of water, and we don't want to take that chance. So instead, I really like the back wall if at all possible. If you don't have a good spot to screw it in, you may be able to add a board across the back and then put this on that board and then plug all your things in. Now keep in mind, if you plug in too many things into a power strip, you might trip the little reset button and then you won't be able to use this because, I'm sorry, it could trip this entire power strip and just kill the tank. So we don't want to overdo how much juice is going into the power strip, just as much as we don't want to overdo what's going into the outlet in the wall. You may need more than one circuit near your aquarium for safety's sake, just to have the ability to spread everything out. All the cords that are coming out of your sump, they're plenty long. They're usually about 6 feet long. You want to make sure that you don't just have them go straight into, like I was talking about the power strip a minute ago. If I was doing the lazy thing, just have the power strip sitting here, and I plugged in my heater into here, and just so you know, this power strip is not plugged in the wall, so we don't have to worry about a fire. But if I had it like this, and I had my cord like this, and I'm working in here, my arms are wet, the water would drip off my arm, follow this wire, follow it right into the cord, and go right into the outlet. So again, having it up high and having the cord hanging down, water follows the flow. It's called a drip loop, and we want to use drip loops around equipment with salt water and electricity. Okay. I think that's it for that part. Let me switch back here. Let me check my notes and see if there's anything I forgot about. Let's say you have a sump, or let's say your tank has more than one drain, like we talked about last week, and the sump that you just bought has room for one pipe. One of the things you might want to do is take all those plumbing pipes coming down and combine them into one and then go straight into the sump. But that's actually not the right way to do it. You want to take the main drain from the tank and go into the main drain of the sump. And then if you have another pipe coming down, you can just run that and route it with different fittings into the sump section, preferably somewhere near the protein skimmer, because the skimmer should be the first line of defense when it comes to filtration. I like to have the raw tank water go straight to the protein skimmer, and then it travels to the next zone. If you had an emergency drain that is dry, except in an emergency, I would actually put that drain into the return zone and have it this far above the water line. So that way, when the water's coming out, it's splashing down into the return zone. And I'm like, what is that horrible sound? That does not sound right. That sounds like Niagara Falls. I open my cabinets. Oh my God, my drains are clogged. My emergency drain is keeping the floor dry. That's a good thing. But what on earth has happened? And you start to investigate what's happening with the display tank above and figure out what's going on with your plumbing down below and resolve the problem. But that's my best advice to you. If you were to put all the drains into a single drain going straight into the fleece roller / filter sock / bubble tower, you may never know your emergency drain is running at all. And you might not know that you have 2 drains that are clogged and your third one is doing the whole job because it's all tied together. So don't tie them together. Another popular choice that I think we've weaned most people off of, I'm not going to say it's completely gone, but I don't hear people talking about it nearly as much, is the mighty check valve. And check valves were, man, people use those things in the 2000s all the time. And I just spent so much time telling people don't use them. Because the problem is a check valve works until it doesn't. And that's physics. You've got this pipe that's going straight up from your return pump. So here's our return pump. And let's just say we're using flexible hose. And then the hose goes up, and then we go into a check valve, and then we continue it up to the display tank. So as the water is being sucked into the pump and pushed up, it goes into the check valve, and there's a little flapper that lifts up to let the water go up. And then when the pump turns off or the power goes out and the pump has to turn off, the water coming back down the pipe pulls the flapper down immediately and stops any more water from draining. You'd think that's a fantastic thing. But the problem is it only works until it doesn't. And it could choose to not work for a couple of reasons. It could just be that it's been open for so long, let's just say you've never had a problem whatsoever, and the pump has been running for 12 months without incident. Never been turned off. You're one of those guys, never cleans a pump. That thing could be wedged in the open position and cannot come down. And it cannot seal the pipe, and so the water in your display tank could continue to drain and drain and drain through siphon and sucking the water out more and more and more. And soon your sump is overflowing, and now it's into your cabinet, and now it's on the floor, and now you have a much bigger problem because you've got water around your electricity and all that kind of stuff. So I say don't use a check valve at all, Instead, I would send the plumbing straight up to the tank, and then where the pipe goes into the water, you go half an inch under the water line, okay? So you've got your water coming up, going into the tank, and here's your water line here, and your pipe is going under and squirting forward to like direct where you want the water to go. I'm watching this mosquito, waiting for it to land so I can kill it. Sorry. And you want to drill a small hole in the PVC pipe or in the lock line that's in your display tank half an inch under the water level. So whatever your normal water line is, you've got your lock line coming in, you got one coming in here, you want to go ahead and figure out where that spot is. You can mark it any way you want. You can put your finger on that spot and then turn off the pump or have somebody unplug it, and you can just bend the lock line up with your finger on that spot, and like, that's the spot I need to drill a small hole. Or you can mark it with a rubber band and just slide it over the lock line to that sweet spot, and then when you fold it up, because you're working by yourself, then you know that's a spot, and you want to drill a 1/4 inch hole, preferably 2 holes. And the reason you do 2 holes is because Murphy is always watching. You've heard of Murphy's Law? So Murphy says, oh, I bet I can make Mark's life miserable right now with the simplest of things. I'm going to just encourage that snail to cover that hole. Get a nice little foot massage, and it'll just snack on the algae growing on the lock line because Mark never cleans the lock line. And the snail's like, ooh, this feels good. Yeah, I can just feel that water just thumping on me. It feels so good. And then power goes out, and the snail is covering the hole with its foot because it's enjoying that massage, and the siphon doesn't break, and it just sucks out 4 or 5 inches of water out of your tank and overflows the sump and floods the room, and you got to get out the carpet cleaner and you got to deal with the mess. No. If you drill a couple of holes, hopefully the snail is only getting one part of its foot massaged and the other hole is still open to suck in air, because as the water siphons back out, as soon as that hole gets exposed to air, it will suck in air immediately and break the siphon. Now, if you were to drill the holes on the top of the lock line, which would be a terrible mistake, as soon as you turn on the return pump, you'll find out why that was a mistake. Because as the water shoots up the pipe and comes out the lock line, there's that hole in the top, and it squirts water straight up at your lights. And it could look like your tank is peeing. So we don't want to do that. We want to drill on the underside of the plumbing that's half an inch underwater. And that's called an anti-siphon hole. So I like to put a couple on each return. It is the best way to do it, because that way you don't have to worry about something going wrong. But then you need to test them. And the easiest way to test them is to turn off the return pump. And then just watch the tank and see the water go down because it's being back siphoned. And then you hear, and it breaks the siphon and the sump stops filling up with water and everything's perfect. And if you check that once a month, you'll never have a problem. And if for some reason you're checking it and it doesn't break the siphon and you see the water draining, well, the first thing you do is immediately lift the lock lines up to get them to suck in air, okay? The second thing you do is grab a toothpick or some kind of dental tool and you start poking those holes to get out whatever has clogged the hole shut, which could be Valonia, it could be vermites, it could be just something solid has gotten in there, and you need to break it up so that that hole is open to suck in air. And if you've done that, you're not going to have a problem with your sump overflowing. Now, I'm telling you all these precautions. You would think, well, why do I even want a sump then? Again, it's because we want all that gear that ruins the look of your aquarium down beneath inside this acrylic box or this glass box, so that way you can just enjoy the livestock. And it's just, there are things you should keep in mind if you want to set up a tank properly to avoid having problems down the road and avoid making people mad in your household and avoid being frustrated in general. So we just set everything up as much as we can down below. Now, I didn't really go into refugiums much, but if you were trying to have a sump that had a refugium zone, that is totally fine, and I actually recommend that the refugium zone be 10% of your display tank. So if you have a 100-gallon display, I would suggest that you have a minimum of a 10-gallon refugium. And you'd be surprised how much space that takes out of your sump. You might say, well, wow, that just shrunk everything. It's like, then maybe you should not have that refugium in the sump. Maybe you should have a second container that is the refugium that is somehow plumbed into the system and the sump. And it could be it could be a planted tank next to your reef tank that is just filled with macroalgae. And now that you've got this beautiful, filled with macroalgae biotope that people are like, ooh, what is this? That's really cool. Then you start thinking, I bet I could put seahorses in there. Or, I could put in some really cool invertebrates. And an arrow crab could be in there. Or I could have harlequin starfish. Or whatever it is that you think might be fun to have in an area that is really a lot of macroalgae. And the algae can be easily harvested because it's at waist level or higher because it's a display. So you can just reach in, pull out some algae, throw it away, or share it with another hobbyist, and not have to get on your hands and knees to pull plants out of your refugium zone. Also, by not having the refugium down in the sump, you're not going to put a light down over the sump shining down into the refugium, because the light that your refugium area is needing will also go all over the reactors and the protein skimmers and the cords and the baffles, and you end up with algae growing in other parts of the sump that you really don't want. So we want to contain that light in the refugium zone itself. And so if you're doing a sump that has a refugium compartment, then whatever light is hanging down over that section, I would put some kind of a shield around the light. And this is the thing that people always say, well, I want the baffles to be black. That's not going to solve it because the light is doing this. If we go back to this one right here, let's just pretend this is a 3-zone sump. And let's just say that this is our protein skimmer section. And this is our refugium section. And then we have a return zone that you can't see because I'm in the way. Okay, perfect. So if we have the skimmer here, we have a refugium here, and we have a light right here. This light will shine on the body of my protein skimmer. It'll shine on the body of the reactor that's in the return zone, and I'll get this nuisance algae growing inside the body of my protein skimmer, and I've got to clean the skimmer out on a regular basis because I don't want to build up and become coralline and become a real problem. So instead, I would put some kind of shield around the light to direct the light straight down. So there are people out there that are taking... they're going to the 3D printers and they're creating, or they found a file they can print that they can fit onto their AI Prime light, for example, and it just becomes like a barn. I think they call it barn doors, and they just fold them down so that the light has to direct its way straight down. The light from Neptune Systems called GRO, G-R-O, that one apparently can get wet. I've not done it, but apparently it can. So you can literally put the light down low in the sump, right over the refugium zone, and light just that area and avoid sending light onto the protein skimmer, which would be nice. But I always think that any kind of light fixture, because I'm not using the GRO, so what do I know? If I had a light, I would put the light right here. I would not put the light down here, because once the return pump is off, the water's going to rise up and it could get this light really wet. So I like to have it up here where even if the sump filled all the way to the top with water somehow, the light is above it and staying nice and dry. Just being cautious because we don't want to have disasters. Now, the sump area is going to be for equipment specific to the display tank, but there's other equipment you might want to use. You may have pH probes and temperature probes. Where am I going to put those? I would put them between the baffles because the water is flowing through the baffles all the time. That is going to be the most consistent amount of water flow moving through a sump. So putting the probes there would be ideal. Plus, again, if you're doing that water change or you're cleaning out your sump, the water between the baffles is staying there, so the probes stay wet the whole time. They're not being exposed to air, which can ruin probes. So I would do that. If you wanted to have a UV, that is a device that needs a pump to push water into it, and the water comes out the other end, and there's a UV bulb inside of it. That does not go in the sump. Matter of fact, you need to find a great spot for it. They're usually pretty huge. They take up a lot of space. How they're installed is important. I believe, I've not used one, but I believe they have to be vertical because you want to push the water in, you want the water to come out, and you want all the air to come out, right? So that there's no dry spot inside. You don't want a big air pocket in there. So I think they have to be vertical, which means it has to fit somewhere, but you've got this sump taking up all this space, and so you're trying to figure out where to put it. And the other problem is when you have to take it apart to replace the bulb, you don't want the water going everywhere either. So you got to figure out a way to remove it carefully, disconnect it from the tubing, not drain water on the cabinet area or all over you, as well as open it up and remove the bulb. Like I said, I don't have any personal experience with it, so I can't give any advice on it. I'm just saying be aware of the water in the UV system and not getting it all over your electrical. Like, for example, when I was in New York and I had to install the Apex system on 3 different reef tanks, under each cabinet there was a huge sump and there was an electrical section, and inside the electrical section of every tank was a UV standing there with all the electricity around it. And I was just like, oh my God. And there was so many plugs on the bottom, just the power bricks, the 6-way power strips, the 4-way power strips, all that stuff was on the bottom with this UV just standing above it. And I was just kind of freaking out. I just thought, oh my God. So I did everything I could to get all the electrical up high. I got the power bricks over here. I arranged the UV as best I could. And then later on, when the client had to change the bulb, he says, I got water everywhere. I said, yeah, I know, because there's a little sensor that the Apex controller uses that tells you if the cabinet got wet. And I got a notification telling me that there's water in his electrical section. And I was like, yep, I'm not surprised. Make sure you get a towel and wipe it all off. Just be glad I didn't get into all those outlets, because that was the big concern, obviously. So there's that. If you're using a fleece roller or you're using filter socks, a lot of times the fleece roller is put toward the front of the sump, which is kind of funny because you don't have to work on it very often. But the filter socks are always in the back where you can't reach them. So the occasional time I do build a sump for a customer and they want a filter sock, I try to arrange it in a way where the filter sock is in the front, where they can easily reach in and get the sock out and have a bucket handy and put the sock in the bucket and walk into the sink to wash it all out and get it cleaned up and put it back in. Where that, if you had it in the back, usually it's going to be something like turn off the protein skimmer, remove the collection cup, put it down over here. Now reach over the protein skimmer, reach over the refugium light, reach over everything to get to that filter sock to remove it. And that's why people tend to ignore it. And it's one of those things you're just like, wow, I wish this had been designed differently. Now, when it comes to sound, it's nice to have the quietest sump you can possibly have. But dead silent is usually a kind of a signal to us hobbyists that our tank's in trouble. When it's absolutely silent, we wake up from being dead asleep, and we're just like, what's wrong with the tank? Because we don't hear anything. So having a little bit of sound going through your sump is normal. Having it dead silent is probably going to be nearly impossible to accomplish. Some people can do it. I visited a tank in Houston once, and I was like, I cannot believe this thing is on. Seriously? And it was an SPS reef. You had a ton of flow in there, and you heard nothing. And I was super impressed. And it's one of the reasons why I ended up using the full siphon drains on my 400 gallon, because I was really impressed with how quiet it was compared to my system of using Durso standpipes and having them drain into a box in the corner of the sump. So if you want to use full siphon, you can. Now, let's say your tank has 2 separate drains that are coming down into one end of the sump, which is the skimmer section. How can you arrange the plumbing in a way to where it all works out? You can bring the 2 drains into the single, using a T-fitting to go into the single drain going in. Or you can have one go into the bubble tower, or maybe the sump has 2 inlets, and you can just run each pipe into that. That would be fine. When it comes to sending the water back up to the tank, I normally don't do anything in the sumps I build regarding like some kind of way to tether the plumbing to the sump. I've seen some people that they really want to micromanage their system, and they say, I want the return pump to be in the back. I want the plumbing to come up from the pump, go through a bulkhead of the sump, and then go up to the tank. I mean, they're really trying to like lock it all in like Legos. And for me, again, that's going to be a hard thing to work on to clean later because you've locked it all in so snugly. So instead, I kind of like the flexibility. If you can put the return pump anywhere you want in that return zone, and you can move it forward to put a reactor behind it. You can move it over because you need to put one more thing over here. You can scoot it all over to the edge so you can clean and vacuum out, the detritus. So I like to have that flexibility. So I usually don't do anything that pertains to the return pump. The probes we talked about, like pH and temperature, ORP, salinity, there's different ways of measuring that in our tanks. And I like them in the baffles, but if you can't put them there, the skimmer section is a good spot to have them because that's usually the raw water of the tank. So I would put them somewhere, preferably on a rack that has probe holders on it that's magnetic, because then you can move it to that sweet spot. And if it's totally in a terrible spot, you can move the entire thing somewhere else. When I first made my sumps years ago, I was always gluing in a permanent bracket. And no one complained, not once. I always made sure the bracket was big enough that they could get the probe in there. And I tried to put it in the back behind where the protein skimmer would be. And like I said, no one ever said anything, but I kept thinking it's locking you into this is the only spot you can put it for the rest of your life. So I stopped including those in my sumps because I know there's magnetic options. Slide Lock makes them. Neptune makes them. Well, actually, a lot of companies make them. And so you just search for a magnetic probe holder, and you'll find all kinds of choices out there, and you can just stick it anywhere you want in the sump. And even if you're doing a water change and you want to keep the probes wet, you can, because it's magnetic, you can just basically shove it all the way to the bottom of the sump and keep those tips wet while you're removing all this water. And then when you're done, move it back up to that sweet spot and have good flow going across those probes so that you're getting accurate measurements. Let's see. Anything else I didn't mention? That's pretty much it. How do we do on time? Not too bad. I don't like to have the top off container inside the sump. Like I said, it steals space. The other problem is that it's not tall enough. I like a really tall top off container. Matter of fact, I just had a customer locked in an order with me yesterday, and she wanted her top off container to be 35 inches tall. That's a lot. But she's putting it outside of the stand. It's going to look like the stand. It's going to be made of white acrylic, so it'll look like the white cabinetry. And that way it just kind of blends in, and there's a lot of water to top off 2 tanks side by side with that container in the middle. And it's going to hold about 20 gallons of water, so it's going to last her maybe a week, maybe a little bit less. And she'll refill it automatically from an RO system using a float valve in the top off container. Now, when you have any kind of top off container or top off reservoir, and by the way, I've noticed this for a long time, and I was doing the same mistake. Everyone kept calling it the ATO, which is automatic top off, when it's really a TOR. It's a top off reservoir. So if you're getting a TOR for your system, you want to make sure that you set it up in a way to, again, we don't siphon too much water into the sump and flood the sump. So let's say you have a sump that has 8 inches of water in it, and you've got a TOR that's got 20 inches of water in it, and the top off turns on, it squirts water in, and then the pump turns off because it's got enough, and it just keeps draining and draining because all the water in here wants to equalize with the water over here, and you've just put in 4 gallons into the sump accidentally instead of half a gallon. So you want to make sure that you have a siphon break so the water going into the sump itself will not continue to happen. So let me switch camera gears again. I'm going to show you. You're going to have to use your imagination here, okay? But I'm going to show you what I did in the past with my 400 gallon. I don't have a PVC pipe handy, but what I did was I put the PVC pipe in my sump and it stood straight up. My top off container was over here, and my tubing went over. I put little like sticky tabs that were screwed into the cabinet so I could zip tie my tubing across and come over here. And so here's my top off container. There's a pump inside it. It's pushing water through the tubing, through a zip tie, and then it points down into this PVC pipe. And I just put the tube in the top of the PVC pipe, and then it's just pipe all the way to the bottom. I didn't snake the tubing all the way down because that would create a siphon. But by having it come to here and then just go straight into the PVC pipe, what happens is as soon as the pump turns off, it breaks the siphon and the water in the tube goes right back in the container. Whatever was left goes down the pipe into here for top off. And I ran it like that for, I don't know, 5-6 years. Never once had a problem. It worked perfectly. So if you're trying to figure out a way to alleviate that, that's one method. Run the tubing up high into a PVC pipe. The other choice is to put a fitting inside the container, and sometimes they come, like the ice cap top-off system, the Comore top-off system, the ATK from Neptune, they all have a little fitting that you put inside the TOR that as soon as the pump turns off, it breaks the siphon, sucks in air, and stops any water from migrating from the tall container into the low section of your sump. I hope that made sense for you. That's it. Can't switch back anymore. Let me try this. All right. So you have, that's one method. That's 2 methods you can use to avoid flooding the sump. Now, anytime you install anything new on your system, you should then basically sit in front of the system and watch it do its job. So if you need to trigger the top-off system and you want to watch it replenish water that's evaporated, sit through the entire process. If it takes 5 minutes, babysit it and make sure that at the 5-minute mark, it literally stops and nothing else happens. And if you see it continue to do something, you know you didn't set it up correctly. You got to make a correction. But if you're doing this kind of stuff, you're setting up a really nice filtration for your aquarium that is automated and makes your life easier in the long run. But it has to be set up correctly in the first place. And if you've done that right, you'll be very happy. But if you just kind of threw it together, or you added it the day before you're gone vacation, almost invariably something's going to go wrong and you're going to regret it later. So that's why I tell you these things. I'm trying to help you avoid the nightmares that have happened to all of us, including myself. Okay, I think we will stop there. I will add a couple of points, and if I see things in the questions, we'll go into it as well. I do always make my sumps so the top flange on them, it's usually 2 inches around, and that is actually, it's there on purpose. It's there for strength because it keeps the sump from spreading apart and separating at the seams. It is also there to contain salt creep because a rimless sump always has salt spatter and creep, and it comes out the outsides and there's drips down the front and the sides and the back, and it's all ugly. So I really like that rim on the top, but it makes it really hard to like hang a reactor. But you can drill holes in it to run tubing into it if you wanted to. So that's nice. Like if you're using dosing pumps and you have dosing tubes pushing liquid into your system, then you would just go ahead and drill a small hole for the 1/4 inch tubing and snake it through. Or you can just use a magnetic tubing holder like Slide Lock makes and run the tubing into the sump and into that holder and just put it exactly where you like it to be. But that rim is there for a reason, and it's a logical one, and so I've always built them that way. And I think out of every sump I've ever built, and I've built hundreds, I probably made 3 rimless sumps for customers that absolutely wanted that. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I just made the acrylic thicker to make sure it was strong enough. All right. So let us see what you guys asked me today. So this is the part of the show when you ask questions and I answer them. And we all get to tune in and see what the conversation's about. I see you guys mentioning that the sync or the lips are not lining up with the audio. I noticed that last week, and I did not think to correct it. I forgot. I asked a friend if he could help me test this and make sure everything's working right, and I never made the adjustment. And to be honest, I doubt I can make the adjustment during the show anyway if I wanted to, so I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to be... How am I doing that? Am I speaking before... Yeah, I'm speaking before the audio comes on. It is what it is. Hillbilly Reefer says, I have a 49-gallon sump and a 40-gallon refugium on a bench in a separate fish room. Made my life so much easier. My question is, can a refugium be effective enough to reduce or eliminate the need for a protein skimmer? Some people might say yes, that would eliminate it. And there are people that just won't even run a protein skimmer whatsoever. Think about the tanks that are set up, and you'll go to a fish store, and it's just this beautiful tank, and then you want to see what's underneath, and you find out there's nothing underneath. And then you ask them, well, how do you filter this? And they said, we do water changes. And you're like, really? And like, no skimmer? Nope. No this? Nope. No socks? Nope. It's a very natural way of doing it. So yes, it is possible to run a tank with a really good, healthy refugium, and you have a lot of pods and stuff, and you won't have the protein skimmer. But for myself, I really do prefer a protein skimmer. I feel like it's always removing the dissolved organic compounds, and it helps to drive off CO2. There's some real good perks to having one. So all the tanks you've seen me running, all my big ones, they always have a refugium and a protein skimmer. Ryan says, if someone wasn't maintaining their sand bed, is it a problem doing a deep clean or siphon? Is it a problem? No. But usually in a situation where you haven't done it for a super long time, it would be best to do it 25% each week for a month. So instead of just tackling it and going side to side, I would work on one zone, and then a week from now do the next zone, and then a week from now, and just do it that way. And that way the system doesn't go into any kind of a weird shock, and you're not releasing a lot of vile stuff into the water column all at once. We have so many delicate animals in our aquariums, and if we really get in there and go super aggressive, and I mean really aggressive, we could end up losing some of the more delicate creatures, the ones that are the hardest to replace, the most expensive. And I'm the kind of guy who likes to just get in there and solve the problem. But like when Dwayne was here a few years ago and we did the reef reset, we worked on the tank for 3 days. And I worked on one section of the sand bed each day, 3 days in a row. But each time I did it, new water went in the tank. And then, the next day we worked on another section, and 40 more gallons of water went into the 400. And then the third day I worked on another section and put another 30 gallons of water in. But I didn't just do all the sand bed all in one session because I did not want to cause chaos. And I didn't have any incidents. Nothing bad happened. So that would be my recommendation. is to just work it section by section. And doing it weekly just makes it easier on your back. Versus my doing it 3 days in a row, I felt it. But it had to be done, and it hadn't been done in many years. And it hasn't been done in many years since. I did a couple of times after Dwayne left, but I haven't done it in 2 years easily. And there's stuff everywhere. I have no room to get to the sand bed. So I have to move things off the sand to clean the sand to put the things back. And I just don't do that. I'm going to make a note for myself to figure out the audio lag. Okay. Oh yes, Andreas says our friends at Adaptive Reef make some really cool controller boards for mounting equipment. So if you want to go beyond just the power strip hanging on the backside of your cabinet, you can definitely have a controller board and you can mount everything on there. You can put the drivers on there, you can put the power supplies on there, you can plug in all the outlets, you can put controllers on there, you can mount dosers on there. I mean, there's so many different things that we have that, it's so funny. You get an aquarium and you get a stand and you're thinking, okay. And then you start learning what gear you need and you end up needing 8+ outlets. You got to plug in 8 things. Like a power strip has 6. So you're like, okay, I need more. And then I tell you, you need 2 heaters, not one. So now I've made you 2 more cords instead of 1 cord. And you end up with more and more and more outlets. So the trick is being able to figure out what everything is and putting them in safe places. And yeah, those controller boards are really, really nice if you have somewhere to put them. There's a noob question here. Valonia or Bologna? It's Valonia. It's just bubble algae. And my little 27-gallon has a lot of it right now. Oh, I see. You wanted to know what it stood for. Yeah, so bubble algae is... it's also called sailor's eyeball, especially when you get one really big 1-inch bubble in your tank. And it can become an obstacle in your system. It can clog up even the returns. The lock line tubing that's going in with that 3/4 inch hole can actually get obstructed 50% of the way with a bunch of bubble algae. And so you scrape that out or use a pipe cleaner, or you remove it, clean it in the sink, and then put it back on the system nice and clean. Terry says, I remember those Lights of America bulbs from Home Depot for the Refugium light. Those things would grow some macro. Yeah, they worked great. And the color spectrum was not pink like it is these days. Terry says, once you go full siphon, you never go back. It's true. The full siphon system is great, but you're also going to have problems with where to put the gate valve when it comes to your sump. So in the situation here with this sump, I would put the gate valve right there, and I'd have the handle right here where I can turn it. And now I can adjust the flow rate going into the sump. And it really will make things nice and quiet. I might as well mention the new issue of Coral Magazine has gone to press. So last weekend I worked super hard, and then I worked on Monday, and then I sweated Tuesday because Tuesday was the day it went to the printer. And this is what it looks like. Let's see. Ta-da! So if you would like to order this magazine, it's on shop.melasreef.com. I need to put that on the screen too. Where is that? Do I have that here handy? I don't see it. Let me make it, because I have to explain this to you. Shop.melasreef. So this right here is the new area to shop for products on my website. I know you're all used to going to melasreef.com and logging in. You don't have to log in to buy things, but you do need to go to shop.melasreef.com. And if you do that, you'll be able to buy things. If you go to melasreef.com and find products, you're going to get this access denied thing, and you're going to say, huh, it's weird. I guess I'll go shop somewhere else. And it's killing me because I need your purchases to stay in business. But this is the correct path, and then once you're there, you can go through the entire shop and buy whatever it is you need. Coral Magazine is in there, and this issue that I just put on the screen right here is going to be available for me to sell probably in about 4 or 5 days. I put it up already, but if you buy it now, it'll just you'll get it when I receive it, and it'll go out to you. So this was the magazine that I've been working on for the last month. This is my first issue. It is volume 20, issue number 6. It's the November-December issue. And there is a lot of cool fish breeding information in there. And I am not a fish breeder at all. I'm a coral guy. So when they said, do you want to work on coral? I'm like, yes. And then all we're doing is talking about fish. I'm like, oh my God. But the issue before this one, Modern Aquaculture, the first, was all about coral breeding and coral aquaculture of corals and mariculture of corals. And it was super interesting stuff. And this was the follow-up. This was the part 2. So it's... Matt Peterson told me that's the duology, Modern Aquaculture 2. So that's why that title is on there. And then the picture was taken by Amanda from ACI Aquaculture, and the background was taken by Michael Vargas, who believes that's a Welsophilia. So we have some really pretty, I just love the cover. I'm going to get it printed. I'm going to stick it on the wall. It's going to hang there forever. And in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoy it. And there was something I mentioned on this stream a few weeks ago, and it gets mentioned in the magazine. So we'll see how many of you notice it. But it should be great. I think you'll really enjoy this issue. Let's see. If there's anything else you need from the shop, from mealsreef.com, please do buy it. I have most everything in stock right now. There's a couple things I'm lacking, and there's some things I need to sell. If you're looking for an Apex controller, if you're looking for a Hydros controller, please shop my shop so I can get it off the shelf. I would really appreciate that. If you're needing things like Phosphate Rex, or you're needing Microbacter 7, or those kind of, just you name it. I sell a lot of things. If you need some things, please do buy them from me. Something that's not in the shop yet, but I definitely am adding, and it's remarkable. These little things, and it's not even a money maker for me. I mean, it's ridiculous because the Fritz glass cleaner comes in a bottle that's probably 8 ounces of liquid, and one bottle probably lasts you, I don't know, a year. So I used it on the front of my 400 gallon the other day. Actually, I used it on 1/2 of the 400 gallon the other day. I sprayed it on there. I got rid of some smudges, and I was like, okay, that looks good, and I'm happy. So then I'm using my cleaning magnet, and it feels like it's dragging because it's a magnet and it's going through glass and it's in the water. And then I get to the Fritz area and it goes whoosh. It just slides and glides so easy. Like, oh, I forgot about that. So I'm going to have to go over all of my tanks and make them nice and glossy. That Fritz glass cleaner really does make it easier to move your cleaning magnet. Super nice. So I definitely want to have that in the shop for you guys to buy as well, because I think, and like I said, if I make $1 a bottle, it'd be a miracle, But still, it's still a cool product, and I do like to sell the things I use, and I like using these things for reasons that make me smile, like making it easier to use the cleaning magnet. Let's see, is there any more questions yet? Let's see. I don't know what these initials stand for, but I'm going to assume it's blunt smack. I'm starting with a 40-gallon reservoir and want to scale up to 4 of them when I move soon. I farm coral, specifically soft, but want to farm all types. The recommended filter style. Well, if you have these 4 troughs or reservoirs that you're running next to the let's say they're on tables and you're working them at waist level, hopefully you have drains going down into a common sump. And you could have a big, like Rubbermaid feeding trough underneath, or you can have an acrylic sump like I showed you, or you can get a glass aquarium and make it into a sump and just make a divider between skimmer section and return zone and just keep it very simple. Or you can make it as complicated as you want. But having something down there to catch all the mucus and all the coral sloughing from you working and fragging would be smart. And so most coral farmers that I'm familiar with usually have really big filter socks, like the 7-inch diameter socks, and they'll have a couple of them, or they'll have 4 or 5 or 6 at the end of their big long trough, and it's catching all the stuff as they're constantly working these corals, and the flow is going across and it's heading in there and it's getting trapped and removed from the system. So you probably do want some kind of mechanical filtration as well as a protein skimmer. Other than that, I think that you'd be okay with what you're trying to do. Also, your lights, because I'm imagining in my head, your reservoir, maybe they're 40-gallon breeders. They're kind of a shallow tank. you're probably not filling them all the way to the top, maybe a little bit less down. So you're not having to penetrate through a lot of water. So your lights don't have to be quite as low. You can lift them up a little bit so you can reach in the tank and work more easily and not have lights in your way. Hey, I was close. I was close on my guess. All right. Yeah, if you're going to do an acrylic sump, you can just build what you like it to be, and you can actually have it with 4 bulkheads across the back wall and have each one drain into it. And it can go into whatever you want. It can go into a giant filter sock, a double sock apparatus if you want. I shared a video a while back. It's not handy on my computer. I'd share it now. Where I made a really big sump that had 2 7-inch socks that took up one end of the sump. And then the water went into that and then flowed through the rest of the zones. And it works out really well. If you wanted to use the fleece roller, he was asking the 500 fleece roller, you could, but I think it'll advance more fabric than you're expecting because it's a work system. It's not just a typical reef tank where you have some detritus. That's my guess. But, you know, if you hate cleaning socks, then I could see that. You know, there's another choice, too, where you set up some kind of a drip system, like the drip trays of freshwater tanks, where they put in batting, and they just take that out because it's super inexpensive, and they just put in they buy a giant roll of it, and they cut off, a foot and stick it in the tray and let the water, go through it and trap a bunch of brown detritus. They throw that piece away, put a new piece, and you just keep swapping them out. And that might be more economical than buying the fleece roller rolls because they're not that cheap. They add up. And if you're constantly having to change them, then you're going to start saying, wow, this was not in my favor. Farmers like to usually want to keep it as simple as possible so they can focus on the animals. And they, a lot of times the gear that we put on our reef tanks are way beyond what a farmer is doing when they're trying to grow coral. All right. Let's see. Yeah, you're very welcome. I think that's it for this part. So let's just do this. Let me remind you that today is Water Test Saturday. I've got to test my tank today. I need to put all my information in Reef Trace. That is the app that I recommend. It's a great way to keep track of all the things you're doing on your tank. And, I like to check everything. I like to check alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, temperature, pH, ORP, because my Apex measures it anyway, so it's just nice to keep track of those numbers. I stick those all in the app. I get to see the graphs showing how the numbers went throughout time. And I also use the notes section heavily. I like to put in anything I do. So if I'm gonna, refill the calcium reactor, I like to put when I did it. When I'm changing the tubing on the Versa pump, I put that in there. When I dosed phosphate RX, I put it in there. I put all those things so I can kind of see how often I'm doing something. If I had to change out the Trident reagents, I like to put that note in there as well. And the nice thing is I get to take a picture of each thing I do, and the photograph is also in my notes. So I have visual as well as text reminders. And you can actually set it up to remind you. I keep saying reminders, I meant notes. You can set it up to remind you to do something. Like you could set up changing the carbon, and then there's an option to turn on reminders. So 30 days from now it says, are you ready to change the carbon again? It's time. And that way you don't neglect it and forget about it. So it's a really practical app. It's always in your pocket. It's easy to use. All the information is saved to the cloud. And they recently changed something which I really, really like. Because when I first started using it years ago, I did the thing that most of us did. I logged in with Facebook. And then I was kind of like stuck. My account was always tied to Facebook. And when we were doing some beta testing, I was like, I can't do what you're asking me to do. I can't log in because it used that Facebook login thing. So they recently changed something because when I got my new phone and I opened it up, it said log in. I was like, oh, man. And so I did the Facebook login, but it immediately said, let's use a password now. And it kind of prompted me into the regular, here's your email address, here's your password, which is so much better. Because, for example, let's say you get in trouble with Facebook and you get banned from Facebook. How will all your Facebook logins work on other things if you can't log into Facebook? So having it, that convenience factor is great until something goes wrong. Now, I've never gotten in trouble with Facebook, but still the possibility exists where it's just better to have an email address and a password for every single app. So no matter what device you open up Reef Trace on, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone or I assume, I don't know, it's an iOS product. So it's those two choices. But when you're doing it, you can go ahead and, even with a brand new device, you don't have to port data over because it's in the cloud. It's all there and you never lose it, which is great. So I do highly recommend that. Jim asked the question, I would like a fish acclimation box, and what's the approximate size, and how much would one cost, and do your magic to build one. I was trying to read that and speak out loud, and that did not come out nearly as much. It did not sound like English at all, but I know what you're asking. So the box itself is 12 inches long, it's 6 inches wide, and it's 8 inches tall. It has a solid top if it's going on a tank that has Euro bracing. If your tank is rimless, I make a rimless version. It's still 12 by 6 by 8 that hooks on the wall of your aquarium. So you can put it on the front or the back or the side. It can go anywhere you can fit it. And they run $100, and they're made of 1/4 inch acrylic. They're very durable. They will last you forever, assuming you don't drop it on concrete and shatter it. So I've had the same one for over a decade, and I just clean it. And it works really, really well for those new fish acquisitions. I like to put a brand new fish in there after it's been acclimated and gone through safety stop. I put it in the Peacemaker. It stays there for 3 days where all the fish can look at each other, but there's no skirmishes because they're divided. And then after 3 days, I just pour it into the tank and there's no aggression. And that has worked with fish after fish after fish. And so, yeah, I make those. I sell a lot of Peacemakers, believe it or not. That is a popular item for my website. W. Mars says, quick question, does the Sump GEXT fit a large internal pump? Well, the reason it's called EXT is for the external pump, but we could talk and I can make that section behind the Refugium wide enough to hold your return pump. So if you can just say what pump you're going to use, yes, it is possible. And but that Sump has your skimmer section at one end, it's got your Refugium across the front on the other end, and then the return zone is in the middle and goes behind the Refugium, and you can put 1 or 2 return pumps back in that back corner. It is possible, and I have done that for some customers. But it really was ideally for putting a bulkhead at the far end, and water had to travel a long way and then get to the external pump and push up, and you'd have no microbubbles. Okay. That's it. I told you guys to test your water. This is the part of the show where it ends. This is kind of a quick one. We will have another one next week, another live stream, and then in 2 weeks we will not. Remember, the next live stream will be about breaking down the 280-gallon reef that's leaking in my living room. So I wanted to go into that story because there's a lot of pictures, a lot of information, and a lot of prep work of what to do with the livestock in the middle of a crisis. And it actually landed on a holiday weekend too. So that'll be a really good one to go over, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. So thank you very much for tuning in this week and for your interaction here in the live stream. I really enjoyed that. And I look forward to hearing from, what's going on with your tanks. If you're not doing it, please be a member of Club Mila's Reef. I don't have the graphic ready. I'm a terrible prepper. I had it, but it disappeared. And so I've got to re-find it again. But Club Mila's Reef is on Facebook. It is a group that has over 9,000 members, and we help each other. We answer questions. We don't make fun of each other. And we get to see each other's tanks. We get to see each other's filtration. We get to see each other's ideas. It's a great group to be a member of. I set that up 4+ years ago. And we've got a great group of people in there. So if you're not a member of it, we welcome you to join us and get involved, because that way we can interact daily and not have to wait for Saturdays. That's it. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'm going to say goodbye.